In today's video, we are going to be learning everything you need to know about the GetX package within Flutter. GetX is an incredibly powerful package that provides you a ton of functionality out of the box that can help you create amazing applications fast and improve your developer experience. We're going to be building a cryptocurrency portfolio application that is basically going to allow the user to input certain cryptocurrencies that they own, and all of this information is going to be fetched from an API. And then the portfolio will basically keep a track of the changes that happen to the price of these different cryptocurrencies and show you at the current point what the actual value of your portfolio is. So for example, I can click on the plus button, open up the model and say that I've just recently bought Ethereum and I've bought Ethereum of 2.54. And then once this is done, I can add this asset, and as you can see, it'll update the portfolio value. And this all is going to be done by using GetX. Not only this, we're also going to have the ability to click on one of these cryptocurrencies and then be taken to another page where we'll be able to see some additional information regarding this cryptocurrency. And finally, we'll also make sure that all of this information is persisted on the device. So when you close the app, come back to the app, then you're going to be displayed with the same information that you had previously saved within it. So by doing this, we're going to learn everything that you need to know about GetX. This includes things at state management, dependency management, how to work with navigation, and a whole bunch of other things. Before we get started, I'd just like to quickly mention the links to all of the resources that I mentioned within this video, as well as a link to the source code, can be found in the description below. So feel free to take a look at it if you're confused at any point. With that said, let's take a look at the dependencies that we'll be using to actually build this project, and then we'll take a look at what we have to do in terms of code. So firstly, we're going to be using the get package, or GetX as they call it. And this is the package which is going to provide us with a bunch of different functionality that we'll need to actually create the application. So let's copy this dependency. Let's come back to our Flutter project, pubspec.yaml, and then under the dependencies section, I am going to add get. With this done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is coming to the next package that we'll be using, which will be Google Fonts. And this is basically going to allow us to change the font that we use within our application. Then we'll be using the DO package to actually perform our HTTP requests. Beside this, we'll also be using shared preferences. And the reason we're using the shared preferences package is so that we can actually persist the information that the user adds in terms of the different assets that they own, so that when the app gets restarted, the information is still available to the user and they don't have to re-input everything. So let's copy shared preferences. Let's come back. Let's add that as well. Let's do command save. And that's pretty much all we had to do in terms of the setup. Besides this, what I'd like to quickly mention to you guys is to actually improve your developer experience and also make this tutorial not be extremely huge. What I've done is actually left a link down in the description below to the completed source code for this project. So what you can do is download that. And once you've downloaded the source code, pretty much you're going to be doing this. And that is to open up the lib folder. And then within the lib folder, you're going to be copying a folder in from the downloaded source code that you've downloaded now on your system, and that folder is going to be the models folder. So I'll copy the models folder and then I'll basically paste that in within the lib folder. And the reason we're using this models folder is because it's going to make it very easy for us to develop our application, and this is basically going to consist of different classes that will help us model the data that we're going to be using within our application. So as the name suggests, the API_response.dart class basically contains classes which mimic the structure of how a response from the API that we're going to be using is going to look like. And then this is basically going to allow us to transform the response from JSON to an actual Dart class that we can use throughout our application and ensure type safety. And similarly, we have this coin_data.dart file. It contains a coin data class, so basically a class that is going to mimic the different information that a coin has and things like that. So you don't have to worry too much about this. Just understand that these are just Dart classes that model the data that we're going to be using within our application, and they have some utility functions added on top of them that can, one, allow us to take in some JSON and then construct an instance of a particular object, and secondly, allow us to take a specific instance and then convert that to JSON. So that's pretty much all what these classes do. There's nothing complicated going on here, and you'll understand why we're using them in just a bit. So with this done, that's pretty much all you have to do. You can close down the models file. There's nothing else you need to worry about. So besides the model folder, everything else we're going to be doing from scratch, so you don't have to worry about. I'll make sure that by the end of this video, you're a star when it comes to using GetX. So now that this is done, what we can do is actually come and open up Google Chrome. And then what I'm going to be doing is telling you guys the API that we're going to be using to actually get information regarding the different cryptocurrencies and the prices of them. So we're going to be using the cryptorank.io's API. And this is an API that's free to use, so that's why I selected them, and they have pretty accurate data. And the way you're going to be doing this is basically come to CryptoRank pubspec.io, basically register an account for them. Once you've registered an account, open up the sidebar menu that's here on your profile, go and come to API, and then here what you're basically going to be doing is coming to the point where it says API key, and then generate a key here like so, then copy this key like so, and then you can come back to your lib folder, and here you can say that now I'm going to be creating a new file, and I'm going to say that this is going to be const.dart. And once this is done, within const.dart, we're basically going to be creating a variable, which I'll say final string, and then I'll say this is going to be called crypto rank API key, and let's do is equals to the API key that we had just copied in, command save, and now we have this API key within our project, so we can use that within the different points. Now with this done, the last thing that I'd like to let you know before we actually begin coding is that if you'd like to take a look at the actual documentation for this API, you can click on this button here. That's also going to be on the actual API dashboard. And if you click on this, this is basically going to open in a new tab the actual documentation for the API. And specifically, what we're going to be working with is going to be the endpoint, which is list of currencies with data. So this is basically going to provide us with a list of different currencies, the price for them, and everything like that. So now that this is done and you have a good understanding of this, we can continue to actually start coding our application, and then slowly we'll be coming back to this documentation to take a look at what type of data gets returned to us, how this API actually works when we're building certain features. So let's minimize Google Chrome, let's come back to Visual Studio Code, and let's get the party going. Firstly, what I'll do is actually show you how you need to set up your application so that GetX starts working. And the only thing that you have to do is that instead of using the material app widget, which basically wraps around your complete application, you're going to be now using a widget that is provided to us from the GetX package called getMaterialApp. And that's pretty much all the change you had to do. With this done, let's do command save. Let's make sure that we had installed all of our dependencies. So you can do that by coming to the pubspec.yaml while doing command save. And this is going to automatically run Flutter pubget for you if you have the Flutter extension installed within Visual Studio Code. Otherwise, you'll have to do Flutter pubget by yourself. Then I'll do start debugging, and I'll wait for this application to actually launch on the simulator. And once it launches, then I will resume this. Welcome back, everybody. So now that the application is running, the next thing that we're going to be doing is basically coming to the point where we're setting the home property on our material app. And I'm going to be replacing that now. We're going to be using routes within our application, which are going to be named routes. So I'm going to be replacing the logic for the navigation stack to actually use those instead of the home parameter that's defined on the material app. So to do that, firstly, we need to define the routes map, which basically is a key function pair where we basically define a key, which is the actual route name, and then the actual function that defines how the route gets built. So we're only going to have one route, which is going to be /home, and that is going to correspond to a function that gets a build context passed to it, and then basically returns our home page, which is a widget that I've created under the pages folder within my application, which is an empty stateless widget for now. So there's nothing fancy going on. With this done, I will do command save, but before I do that, one other thing that I'll do is that I'll set the initial route property on the material app to be /home. So this initial route property needs to match with the keys that are within our routes map. So one of the keys here needs to be here. Otherwise, this is not going to work. Let's do command save, and let's see what the error is. And it's telling me that null check operator used on a null value. So let's stop running our application first, and then let's start running it again, and hopefully this should fix the error for us. And while this is happening, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is coming to my home_page, coming to the build function, and then instead of returning a placeholder, I'm going to say that we will return a scaffold. Let's see if the application works as intended. Save. There we go, it's working as intended, so we can move on to the next step. So for the next step, I'll come to main.dart, and here what I'm going to do is set the debug and then show checked mode banner to false. I don't want to show this debug banner that we're seeing here. With this done, let's do this. Let's come to our home_page. Let's come to the scaffold. And on the scaffold, what I'm going to be doing is basically saying that we're going to have the actual app bar. And then what I'm going to do is basically say that the app bar is going to be set to a function, which is going to return the app bar. So I'm going to say there's going to be a function preferred size widget. It's going to be called _app bar. It's going to basically get the build context passed to it. And then the function will basically return an app bar. And then what I'll do is basically set this function call to be the app bar like so. Let's do command save, and there we go. That's pretty much all we had to do. With this done for the app bar, we're going to be doing two things. We'll have an actual image on the left hand side and then an actual icon on the right hand side, which the user can click on to display a modal through which they can add assets to their actual portfolio. So to do that, what I'll do is firstly say that the title is going to be a widget, which is going to be const circle avatar. And here I'm basically going to say that the background image property is going to be a network image widget. And then the URL here, I'm just going to copy and paste that in. It's just going to be a image from Pravatar CC, which is an excellent website that provides you with these placeholder images that you can use while you're developing your application. So there we go. Now we have the image showing. The next thing that I'm going to be doing is actually adding the actions list on the app bar. And we're just going to have one action, which is going to be an icon button. And then the icon button is going to have an onPressed callback, which is going to be an empty function for now. And then the icon is going to be icons dot, and I'm going to do add. And that's pretty much all we had to do. And one other thing I have to do is make sure that I wrap this actual icons.add within an icon widget. So like icons.add, there we go. And let's do command save. Let's see if we can see the icon. There we go. We can see the icon. So that's pretty much what we had to do for our app bar. One other thing that I'm going to be doing is coming back to my main.dart now and basically configuring the theme on our actual material app so that it uses the correct text theme and things like that. So to do that, let's come to our main.dart file, and then I'm going to do the following. I'll change the color scheme first. So now I'm going to say that instead of using colors.deep_purple, we're going to be doing colors.green. So our application is going to be based upon a greenish color scheme. After this is done, the final thing I'm going to be doing is defining the text theme on the actual theme object. And since we're using Google Fonts, what you can actually do is come to the Google Fonts website, and whatever actual fonts that you like, you can basically browse through the fonts website and use them within your application. So the font that I like is called Quicksand, which I'll show you how it looks. There we go. So I'm going to be using this one. So the way you're going to be using is just keep a track of the name, then basically come to the text theme, and here we're going to do Google Fonts dot, and then basically what the theme is. So Quicksand, there we go. It's called Quicksand text theme. And then this is a function, so we gotta invoke it, and that's pretty much all we had to do. So with this, let's do command save, and that's pretty much all we had to do. Now everything else is going to be taken care of automatically, and the fonts are going to be applied within our actual project. So now that this is done, we can actually close down our main.dart file and come to our home_page.dart and start adding some functionality here. So the first thing that I'd like to do before I show anything on my home page is to actually implement all of the functionality here for when the user clicks on this button to show an actual modal. And then we'll actually start building up more functionality within the modal as well for actually having some drop downs and things like that. So how can we do that? Well, since the modal is going to be an actual widget that gets displayed, and it's going to be a widget that has a custom style, what I'm going to be doing is creating a new folder within my lib folder. And this is going to be called widgets. And then underneath of this, I'm basically going to be creating a new file, which is going to be called add asset dialog. So to do that, let's do add asset _ dialog.dart. And that's pretty much all we had to do. And then this widget is basically going to be a dialog widget. So I'll create a stateless widget, and I'm going to say that this is going to be called add asset dialog like so, and do command save. With this done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is basically saying that we are going to return for the build function a material widget. That's first thing that we're going to be doing, and this is going to contain a child, which is going to be a container. Then the container is going to have a specified height and width. So let me copy and paste those in, because this is very basic Flutter code. We're just basically setting the height of the container to be 40%, the height of the screen, the width to be 80%. And then after that, I'm going to set the decoration property on the container. So I'll copy and paste that in as well. And what we're doing is basically setting the border radius to 15 and the color to be white. With this done, we'll just do this for now. Let's come back to our home_page and let's see how we can use GetX to display this actual modal. So to do that, let's come to our home_page.dart. Let's come to our actions on our app bar, and let's come to where we have on pressed. And when the user presses the actual icon, this is the function callback that is going to be run. So here what I'd like to do is basically run the following function, and it's called get.dialog. And that's pretty much all we had to do. And then we basically pass it an actual widget here that we'd like to display as a dialog. So we're going to have the add asset dialog. So I'll import that in, and that's pretty much all we had to do. And let's do command save. So now with this done, I can actually come back to the actual button and let's click on it. And there we go. You can see that now the actual dialog gets displayed. So the dialog is pretty much taking up the whole screen. It's not actually conforming to the size that we've specified, but we'll fix that in just a bit. But for now, you can see that at least the dialog kind of shows up. So that's the good part about this. So now what I can do is come back to the add_asset_dialog file. And here we can start adding some more functionality. So firstly, what I'll do is come to my container. And then on my container, I'm going to have a child. And then a child is going to be a call to a function called build UI, like so. Once this is done, I will say that now I'm going to return a widget from this function. It's going to be called build UI. And then I'll open up the actual body for this. Within the build UI function, for now, I will return a column like so. And then the children's list within this column is going to be empty for now. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, if I come back to the simulator, click on the plus button, there's still the issue of the actual dialog taking up the whole width and height of the screen. So to fix that, I think what I can do is basically on my actual material widget that I am returning, I can wrap that with a center widget. The widget is going to be center. Let's do command save. Let's come back, click, and there we go. Now our dialog is appearing the way we'd like it to, and it's conforming to the sizes that we've specified. So now everything looks great, and because we're using get, it automatically dismisses the dialog as well when we click outside of the bounds of that. So everything's looking great. So now the next thing that we have to do is basically first get access to some information before we can actually display the UI on the actual dialog for the user being able to add an asset. So to do that, we're going to be using the CryptoRank API. We're going to be specifically accessing the endpoint, which is called list of currencies with data, so /v1/currencies. And that is going to provide us with a list of different cryptocurrencies and different information regarding them, such as the actual price of them and things like that. So now that we have a good understanding of this, what we can do is actually implement the mechanism. So what I'm going to be doing is basically implementing a class that will allow me to send GET requests, POST requests, or any other type of requests from my application, and it's going to take care of everything for me when it comes to sending a request, making sure that the headers are correct and everything like that. We're going to be using GetX package to then actually register this class within our application and then use it at various points throughout our application. And this way we'll understand how to work with dependency management within GetX. So to get going, I will come to my lib folder. And here I'm going to create a new folder now, and I'm going to call this services. Then what I'm going to do is basically open this up, and within this I'm going to have a new file called http_service. So this service class will allow us to work with HTTP based requests from within our application. All I'm going to be doing now is creating a class which is going to be called HTTP service, like so. And then I'm going to say that this class is going to have a property which is going to be private. It's going to be called _dio, and it's going to be of type dio. And it's going to be set to a new instance of dio, which is going to be imported from the dio package. Now that this is done, I'm going to define the constructor for this class, and it's going to not take any parameters. But when the class gets constructed, I want to call a function called configure dio. And the reason we're doing this is so that we can set up the appropriate headers on the dio object, so that when our request gets sent, they have the appropriate headers on them, as well as the appropriate query string, so that we get the response returned to us and not an unauthorized response. So if I come to the CryptoRank API, you're going to see that it tells us under the authentication tab that whenever we send a request, we need to attach to the actual request endpoint a query parameter, which is API key. So basically we have to add this. So how are we going to be doing this? Well, within the configure dio function, which I'll say won't return anything, it's going to be called configure dio. I'll do the following. I'll say that we'll set the dio.options is equals to a base options objects new instance. And within this, I'm going to say that the base URL, so the base URL for our API is going to be the following. So you can get this information once again from the actual endpoints documentation. So this is the actual base API. So let's copy that and paste that in. And then besides this, we also like to make sure that every request has a certain query parameter added to that. So I'll set the query parameters property here. and I'm going to say it's going to be the following. So under the documentation, it says that the API underscore key is going to be the query parameter's actual key, and then the actual value for that is going to be the API key that we have. So we're going to be importing that from our const.dart file where we had created the cryptorank API key variable. Let's do command save, and that's pretty much all we had to do. So now when we construct an instance of our HTTP service, it's going to make sure that DO is configured properly and that the base URL for our actual API is set properly, the query parameters are set properly so that the request doesn't fail. Now that this is done, since we're only going to be supporting one type of HTTP request within our application, and that is a GET request, I'm going to be creating a function for that so that we can actually work with them. So to do this, I'll do the following. I'll say that we are going to have a function that will return a future, which will be dynamic. It's going to be called GET, and we'll basically have to pass in a path. So I'll say that this is going to be a string parameter that gets passed. It's going to be called path. Then I'll open up a try catch block just to make sure that if we do get any exceptions that the app doesn't crash. And in the catch block, I'll just print the error. And within try, I'll do the following. I'll basically create a variable which will be of type response. This comes from the actual DO package. Response is equals to, and then I'll do await underscore DO dot get. And then we're basically going to be passing it the path that the user passes us. And then after this, I'll say that we will do return response dot data. And there we go. That's pretty much all we had to do. I'll also mark this function as async, and that should fix the issue for us. So now that this is done, we've completely configured our application's HTTP service. And the last thing that we have to do is basically make sure that I return response.data. There we go. And now we can move to the next part. So the next part is to actually let our application know that, hey, the HTTP service exists by registering it, and then we can use that at different places within our application when we want to. So to do that, what I'll do is within my lib folder, I'll create a new file once again, and I'm going to call this utils.dart. And within utils.dart, I am going to be creating a new function, which I'll say is going to return future void. It's going to be called register services. So as the name suggests, it register these different services that I create. It's going to be async, and I'll open it up. And to basically register a service, or you could think of as to register some kind of a instance of a class using get so that we can use it at other points within our application, you can do get.put, and that's pretty much all you have to do. So as you can say, it says that it injects an instance of whatever class that we give it in memory, and then we do not need to define the generic type. For this, get automatically infers the type from the actual class that we're using, and then we can access this instance that's saved in memory for this particular class at other points of our application by doing get.get, but we'll take a look at that. For now, let's just do get.put, and then the dependency here, if you remember, is going to be an instance of our HTTP service. And there we go. That's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, what we have to do is make sure that this function gets run and that the services do get registered before we try to access them. So to do that, I'll come to my main.dart file. I'll come to the main function. I'll mark this asynchronous now. And then here I'm going to do that. I'm going to do await underscore, and then register services is going to be the function. So there we go. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, let's reload our application. And as you can see, nothing breaks. So that means that our application launched successfully and that the service was registered successfully. So I know that there's a lot of boilerplate code going on and that you might be confused as to what's going on for now, but just kind of keep going with me, because in just a little bit more time, you're going to actually see how all of these pieces come together and what the actual purpose of doing things this way is, because it's going to make it very easy for us to maintain our application, make it more composable, make it more modular, and it's going to make sure that we are following good coding practices such as not repeating ourselves again and again. And that's always a good thing. So with that done, what we can do is close down the main.dart file. Let's close down all of the other files. Let's just keep the add underscore asset underscore dialog.dart file open. And let's actually talk about the next thing that we have to do. So now that we have our HTTP service set up, we need to use that to actually fetch data from the API. But besides that, we also need to manage some state on our add asset dialog. And the state we need to manage it are a couple different things. We firstly need to manage actually getting the data and then saving that information in a variable so that we can display it. We also need to manage the loading state, so when we're actually getting the data that the user sees as spinner instead of the actual UI. And then we also need to manage the state for when the user selects an actual cryptocurrency or an asset, I should say, such as Bitcoin or Ethereum, which one they selected, and the actual input of the user within the actual text field for how much amount of that certain asset they own. So we have to create some kind of a system for that. And the way we're going to be doing this is by creating a controller using the GetX package. And this is the recommended way through which we can manage state within our application, whether we want to manage state for a local variable or we want to do it at a global scale, so throughout our application. So let's actually take a look at what this controller is, how it works, and then I'll kind of show how it works to you. So now let's actually take a look at how to create this controller and then how to consume it and react to the changes that happen within this controller. So to do that, I'll do the following. I'll, at the top of my actual file, create a new class, and I'm going to call this add asset dialog, and then I'm going to say controller. And then I'm going to say that it extends GetX controller. There we go. That's pretty much all we had to do. If you hover over this, it's going to show you that the GetX controller basically extends the listenable mixin and then the list notifier mixin. And this is basically kind of hinting to us that there's some kind of a notification mechanism going on that's maybe going to allow us to re-render our UI when something changes within this controller. And I'll show you how that happens. So for now, let's do this. Let's actually say that we're going to only have one certain state that we're going to be managing within this controller, and that is going to be whether our actual dialog is currently fetching information or not. So I'm going to say that I'm going to create a variable that is going to be loading, and it's going to be equal to false to begin with. But if we do things like this, it's not going to work. What we have to do is make sure that we use observable values when we create state within our controller, or when we create variables that we want to basically get notified for when the value for them updates. So to do that, what I can do is basically, once I've defined the actual value for my variable, just do dot and then OBS. And as you can see, this is going to make sure that the actual value is in observable value, so returns an RX bool. And then I'm going to set the actual type for this variable to be RX bool, like so. So that's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, we basically defined a piece of state on our controller, which is called loading, which basically is an observable value. It will allow us to basically re-render our UI and get notified when the actual value for this actual variable changes. And that's the beauty of using observable values. So now that this is done, if we just do things like this, it's still not going to work, because we need to now link our actual controller with our actual widget that we want to basically consume this controller in. So to actually link up this actual controller with our actual widget, we have to do two things. Firstly, we need to get access to this controller. So let's do that. So to do that, what I'll do is within the add assets dialog, I'll create a new variable final. I'll call this controller, and I'm going to set this equal to get.put. And then we're going to give it the dependency, and the dependency is going to be an instance of our add asset dialog controller. So now that we've added this here, that's pretty much all we had to do. So let's do command save, and let's see what the actual issue is. So it says that methods can't be invoked in constant expressions. Oh, I can remove the const keyword from the constructor, and there we have it. Now it is working. So now that this is done, our controller is now going to have a reference to an instance of our add asset dialog controller. So now the final thing that we have to do is basically make sure that wherever we access the state within this actual controller, before that we within our widget tree have an observable widget or an OBX widget. And that's basically going to allow us to then listen to the changes of state that happen within this controller. So to do that, I'll come to the build function and to come to the center widget, and I'm going to say that now I'm going to be wrapping this center widget with a new widget, and this time this widget is going to be called OBX. If you hover over this, as you can see, this comes from the get state manager package or the get package, and then this is going to have a function that basically is going to take no parameters in, and it's going to return the actual widget that gets rendered within this observable widget. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, we are pretty much ready to listen to the changes that happen to the state within this controller. So now all I have to do is basically wherever I'd like to access this value is do the following, which is to basically access the controller, through this variable and then access whatever property or function that is on it. So let's do this. Let's come to our build UI function, and here I'm going to say that if the controller dot, and then I can do loading, and then I'm going to do is true. So if the actual loading is true, then we're going to do something else. Otherwise, I will return the column. So let's copy this column stuff and paste that in here and do command save. And then for the controller loading, I'm just going to basically return a circular progress indicator, and I'm going to wrap that with a center widget and give it a fixed height and a width. So let's reload our application, make sure that nothing's broken. Let's click on this plus, and as you can see that our dialog is being shown to us and everything seems to be working as intended. And for now, we're not seeing the loading indicator because we've set the value for our loading to be false. Now what I'm going to do is basically come to my dialog controller, and here I'm going to define the onInit function. Override that basically, and then once the superclass's onInit function has been called, I'm going to say that I am going to future dot, and then I'm going to do delayed, and here I'm going to pass a duration. Let's do duration extra long 4, and then I'm going to say that when this completes, then I want to do the following, and this is just so that I can show you how the UI is now going to dynamically re-render itself when changes happen to the state within this controller. I'm going to say that now I'm going to set the loading.value to false. There we go. And then here, by default, I'm going to say that loading is going to be true. Let's do command save. Let's restart our application. Let's come to the plus. And as you can see, we see the loading indicator, but as soon as this future finishes and then the value of loading is set to false, then we are no longer seeing the loading indicator because the widget tree re-renders, and now we're seeing the column being displayed to us, which doesn't have anything for now. So with this done, that's pretty much all we had to do. So now I can undo the changes that I've made and we can move on to the next part. So the next part is when the actual controller gets created, I want to go and fetch the actual assets or these different cryptocurrencies from that specific endpoint so that then I can display that information to the user so that they can add that. So to do that, what I'll do is basically say that within the onInit function, I'm going to call a function after the superclass's onInit has been called underscore get assets. Then I'm going to basically create this function by saying that this function will return future void. It's going to be called get assets. No parameters passed to it, async, open up its body. The first thing that I'm going to say is that loading.value is going to be true when we start the process. Then after that, I need to access my HTTP service. So to do that, I'll create a variable HTTP service, and set that equal to get.find. And then I'm basically going to say that I want to find the HTTP service, and I do not need to specify the actual type for what instance of a class I want to get. Get.find will automatically infer that information from the type that I set on the variable here. You can, for good measure, also add a type here, for example, HTTP service, but this is not necessary. Once this is done, now that we have access to our HTTP service, I'll create a variable, and I'm going to set that to be response data, and I'm going to set that equal to await HTTP service dot get. And then here we're going to pass the path. So the path, if you remember, is going to be the following, which I'm going to come to Google Chrome and show you, is the currencies, list of currencies. So it's basically /v1/. So we have already the v1 part within base URL. So we just need to go to currencies. So the path here is going to be currencies. That's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, the last thing that I'm going to do is say that the loading.value now again is going to be false once we complete the operation. And I am also going to say that we're going to print to the console the responses data. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, let's do command save. Let's open up the debug console within our actual Visual Studio Code instance. Let's come to the debug console. Let's increase the size for this actual window. Let's reload our application, or restart it, I should say. As you can see, GetX is giving me some logs on the actual console, letting me know that an instance of HTTP service was created, get material controller was created. And now when I click on this plus button here, it should say that an instance of add asset dialog controller was created, initialized. We opened up a dialog, and here's the data that we got. So you can see that we get some data. It's a list. List contains these JavaScript objects, each of which corresponds to a specific cryptocurrency. and it's Bitcoin, and then there should be Ethereum. Again, as you can see, ID3 is Ethereum. So now you can see how it works. And once the actual operation completes, then we no longer show the loading indicator. So everything seems to be working as intended. So the next thing that I'd like to do is basically take this response data that I get, which is going to be a map, and then transform that into a instance of my currencies list API response. So basically this is a class that exists under API response here. And this is basically going to make it easy for us to work with the data that we get and have type safety and ensure that we make less errors. And let's do that. So to do that, I'm going to do the following. I'll say that I'm going to have a variable which is going to be of type currencies list API response. And then I'm going to say this is going to be called currencies list API response and set that equal to, and then I'll do currencies list API response dot from JSON. So this is just a utility function that exists on this class, allows us to pass it some JSON, and then from that JSON, it's going to construct an instance of the currencies list API response object. So now with this done, that's pretty much all we had to do. So now the final thing I'm going to do is come to this asset dialog controller. And here I'm going to say that I'm going to have a list. And this list is going to be a list of different cryptocurrencies that the user can add to their portfolio. So this is going to be, again, an observable value. So we are not going to be using list. We're going to be using RX list. It's going to be string. I'm going to say it's going to be called assets, and then it's going to be equal to an empty list for now, which is going to store strings within it. And then we need to add the .obs after this to make it an observable value. So now that this is done, that's pretty much all we had to do. So now I can come back here and I can do the following, which is to just go through the currency list API response, go through the data on this, and then for each of the data, I'm going to do for each. There we go. And for every coin that we get, I'm going to do the following, which is to basically go to my assets and add to that the coin.name. And that's pretty much all we had to do, and do command save. So with this done, I can again do print, and then I can do assets, save, open up the actual debug console like so, and then restart our application. Plus button here, and after some time, there we go. Now it's giving us this list which contains all of these different cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, Tether. So everything looks good. So now I can use this list to actually display that drop down. So everything looks good. We can move on to the last part. So the last part is to actually create another variable, and this is going to be the variable that is going to keep a track of the actual value that the user selects when they've actually made the decision on which cryptocurrency they'd want to use. So what I'll do is the following. I'll say that by default, it's going to be an RX string. So it's going to be a string value. I'm going to say that it's going to be called selected asset, and by default, it's going to be an empty string. And then once we've actually populated our assets field, then what I'm going to do is after that say that the selected asset.value is going to be the first element within the assets. So by default, it's going to be the first element within the assets list. So let's do command save. That's pretty much all we had to do. Let's reload our application, make sure that everything's working as intended, open up the actual dialog, and it looks good. So now what I can do is actually come back to the build UI function and start adding some logic here. So the build UI function, firstly, I'd like to make sure that it takes in the build context. So I'll do that, and then I'll come to where I call the build UI function and say that the context needs to be passed to it. And once this is done, I'll come to the column. So within the column, let's do this. Let's firstly add a drop down button. So to do that, I'll say that we'll have a drop down button, and it requires an items list as well as what happens when we actually select one of the items. So what happens when the actual selection gets changed. So for the items list, what I'll do is the following. I'll access my controller. On that, I have the assets, which is a list of string. I'll map through them. And for every asset that I get, so let me do this, I am going to then return here a new instance of drop down menu item like so. And then finally, I'll mark that or cast that iterable to a list. And then on the onChange function callback, we're going to get a value passed to us, which is going to be of type string. And then basically within this function, we can define what happens. And now for the child here, for this drop-down menu item, I'm going to say that we're going to have a text widget, and it's basically going to be the asset. Like so, that's pretty much all we had to do. So now let's add the trailing commas and the semicolon. And there we go, everything looks good. And we can do command save. And it's going to give us an error, but we don't have to worry about that. It's letting me know that the item.value is equal to widget.value.length is equals to 1. I see. Well, what I need to do is basically on the drop-down menu item, basically define what the value for this drop-down menu item will be. And this needs to be asset. And then finally, on the actual drop-down button, I also need to say that what the initial value is, or what the current value is, I should say. And that is going to be controller.selectedAsset, so if you remember correctly. Now, if we restart our application, hopefully it shouldn't create a fuss again. And if I click plus, it's still giving me an error. So let me actually take a look at it, and then I will actually tell you guys how to fix this error. Welcome back, everybody. So I figured out what the issue was. On the actual value, we need to do controller.selectedAsset.value, because the selected asset is of type rxstring. We need the actual string value from that. So let's do this, and that should pretty much fix the error for us. Let's restart our application. Let's click on the plus button. And there we go. Now, once the actual data has been loaded, we see our drop-down button appearing. And now we can see this list of different cryptocurrencies that we can select. So now the next thing that I'd like to do is basically come to the onChanged. Because for now, when we click on one of these, it doesn't work. It still keeps Bitcoin as selected. So I'd like to fix this. So to do that, just come to onChanged and do the following. Say if the value that gets passed to us is not null, then what I'd like to do is basically update the value, and the way we're going to be updating it is as follows. We'll do controller.selectedAsset.value is equals to the value that gets passed to us within this function. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So let's restart our application once more, open up the dialog, and then if I select Ethereum, there we go. Now Ethereum was selected, Tether was selected, and everything looks good. Our actual UI is rendered dynamically, and the state is being persisted as well. So with this done, the next thing that I'd like to do is basically fix the styling for this. So what I'd like to do is basically come to my actual column and then set the main axis size on the column to be main axis size max. Then I'm going to set the main axis alignment to be main axis alignment space evenly. And then I'm going to set the cross axis alignment to be cross axis alignment center. Save. And then finally, I'll also wrap this actual column with a padding widget. So to do that, I'm going to open up the refactor menu. And then I'm going to do wrap with a padding widget. And then here I'm going to say that the padding is going to be or the horizontal axis, and it's going to be symmetric. So 25 from the left, 25 from the right. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So the next thing that I'd like to do now is basically add a text field. So to do that, after the actual drop down button, I'm going to have a text field. Then on the text field, I'm going to have the onChanged function callback defined, which is going to have the value passed to us. And then after this, I'm going to do the following, which is to actually save and see how it looks. So it looks like this. So let's do this. Let's update the decoration for this to be box decoration, and then the border to be outline input border. There we go. That's pretty much all we had to do. And it needs to be actually input decoration. There we go. And then now the input field looks much better. And finally, the last thing that I'd like to do is define the keyboard type to be text input type dot and number. There we go. Save. Let's click on this. And there we go. Now I can input a value and it works as intended and everything looks good. So the last thing that I'd like to do is basically implement the functionality for actually keeping track of the actual input that the user adds here. So I'll come to my controller and I'm going to do the following. I'll say that now we're again going to have an observable value, and it needs to be a double in this case since the user can input in actual decimal value. So it's going to be rx double. And then I'm going to say asset value is equals to 0.0.obs. There we go. Once this is done, I can come back to my actual text field, onChanged, and then here I can do if the value is not equals to null, then we're going to do controller dot asset value dot value is equals to the value that gets passed to us. And I also need to make sure that I cast this to a double. So to do that, I can do double dot and then parse, and then here I can pass it the value, and then that's pretty much all I had to do. So let's do command save, and it's telling me that the operand can't be null, so we can remove this if statement. reload. Now let's come to our dialog and let's add a value here. So let's do 2.963. And yes, everything looks good. So the last thing that I'd like to do is add an actual button. So let's do that. So to add the button, what I'm going to be doing is after this text field, I'm going to say that we are going to have a material button. And then the material button is going to have an onPressed callback. And then after this, I'm going to define the child for this. And the child, I'm just going to copy and paste that in since it's a very simple widget, just a text widget with some styling applied to it for the color being set to white. Besides that, there's nothing else. So when the button gets pressed, let's just do this. Let's do get.back for now. So let's just dismiss the actual dialog and go to the previous page that we came from. And I'm going to set the close overlays property to true. And let's do command save. Then within the actual material button, I'm also going to say that the color for this is going to be theme.of context.colorscheme.primary. Save. And there we go. Now we can see the add asset button. We can click on it and it dismisses our dialog. We can open it and then we click on it and it dismisses our dialog. And one cool thing about this is that since we are creating an instance of the actual add asset controller using get within our actual add asset dialog widget, when this widget is no longer needed and is unmounted, then this controller is also destroyed. So now the next thing that we have to do is actually create some kind of a mechanism within our application so that we can keep a track of what the user's current assets are. And then when the user actually adds information within this dialog and clicks add asset, to then update that information. And we're going to be doing that by once again creating a controller. But this time the controller that we're creating, it needs to be consumed by multiple different widgets within our application. This controller is not specific to just our dialog or just our home page, because the controller is required for our dialog as well, because the dialog needs to update the state within this specific controller, the one that we're going to create, because the user has just added a new asset. And the controller also needs to be accessed within our home page, because we need to then again access the actual assets that the user has and then display them as a list. So for that, what we'll be doing is actually creating a new folder under the lib folder, and I'm going to call this controllers. Then within this, I'm going to create a new file, and the name for this file is going to be assets underscore controller dot dart. Controller dot dart. There we go. Then what I will do is basically say that we're going to have a class which is going to be called assets controller, and it's going to extend GetX controller. There we go, and then open up the actual class body. I'm going to define the onInit function on this, and for now we'll just say that it's going to call the super classes onInit function. And then the last thing that I am going to be doing is the following, which is to basically register this assets controller. So since I want this accessible throughout my application, so basically this is a controller that's going to be a global controller you can think of. What I can do is come to my utils.dart file, and within my utils.dart file, I can then say that I'm going to now copy this function and paste it. But this time I'm going to say it's going to be called register controllers. And then here I'm going to do get.put, but it's going to be assets controller. Save. Then let's close down this file. Let's come to our main.dart. And then here I'm going to do await. And here I'm going to register controllers. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, let's restart our application. And let's make sure that everything's working as intended. So the last thing that I'd like to do is now I want to come back to my main.dart file, to my assets underscore controller, and here I'd like to define some state that's going to keep a track of the different assets that we have. So for that, what I'll do is the following. I've already created a class under models called track asset, which is basically a Dart class that has two properties: the name of the asset, so basically Bitcoin, Ethereum, or whatever, and then the amount for that. And then it has some utility functions on that so that we can actually take some JSON and return an instance of tracked asset, and then a utility function called toJSON, which basically takes in an instance of this class and returns to us a JSON representation of that. Since the user can have many different assets being tracked, it's going to be a list. It's going to be RX list. It's going to contain tracked asset within it. So let's do this. And then I'm going to say that this is going to be called tracked assets. And I'm going to set that equal to an empty list like so. Now I need to import this. So let's import that from the models folder. And then on my list, let's define the type of items that will be within this list, which are going to be tracked asset. So now that this is done, that's pretty much all we had to do. So the last thing that I am going to be doing is basically making sure that I create a function on this assets controller. And I'm going to say it's going to be the following. It's not going to return anything. It's going to be called add tracked asset. And it's going to take in a string, which is going to be the name of the asset, and a double, which will be the amount of that. And then I'll open up the function body. So here I'll do the following. I'll just say that I'm going to take the track assets, and to that I'm going to add a new element, which is going to be a new instance of tracked asset like so. And then here I'm going to say that the name will be the name that gets passed to us, and the amount will be the amount that gets passed to us. So with this done, we are now ready to consume this. And one final thing that I'm going to be doing is within onInit, I'm going to say that I'm going to print the tracked assets. And then once we've added an asset, I'll print it here as well. Let's open up the actual debug console. And let's go to here. Let's restart our application. Let's come to our add_asset dialog. And firstly, we need access to our actual controller. So how are we going to do that? Well, I'll just come to the point where we actually need to access it and use it. And that's going to be within the add asset material button. Here on the on pressed, before I dismiss the dialog, I'm going to do the following. I'll create a variable. It's going to be assets controller. Call it assets controller and set that equal to get dot. Again, we're going to be doing find. And that's pretty much all we had to do. Once this is done, I'll do assets controller dot, and then I can do add track asset. So now we need to give it a name and an amount. Well, these are available to us on our actual add asset dialog controller here as these variables. So let's actually access them. So let's come back here and let's do, so then we can do controller dot, and then I can do selected asset dot value. And then I'm going to do this following for amount as well. So controller dot asset value dot value. There we go. That's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, let's do command save. Nothing else we had to change. Restart our application, increase the size of our debug console. There we go. The actual tracked assets get printed. For now, it's an empty list. Let's open this up. Okay, let's select Bitcoin. Let's do 1.43. Add. And there we go. Now it's showing me instance of tracked asset. So this means that we have successfully added to our actual assets controller's tracked asset list the asset that we had just added by clicking on the add asset button on our dialog. So now everything's working, and now what we can do is actually consume this information within our home page as well, and then display a list here. To actually display information regarding the portfolio on the home page, I have to do a couple of things. I firstly need to create some text which is actually going to show the combined value of all of the assets that are within our portfolio, and then beneath that I'm going to have a text which says portfolio value, under which I'll have a list which will individually state all of the different coins that I hold. So to do that, we're going to be accessing our assets controller once again, but this time we're not going to be accessing it within our add asset dialog widget. What we're going to be doing is actually accessing it within our home page. So to do this, let's do this. Let's first come to our home page, and then let's set it up in a way so that we can actually consume information and react to the changes that happen within our assets controller. And then we'll actually take a look at actually building the UI. So to do that, firstly, I need access to my assets controller. So on my home page, I am going to create a variable, the type of which is going to be assets controller. I'm going to name this assets controller, and I'm going to set this equal to a call to get.find. And that's pretty much all we had to do. It's automatically going to go ahead and find the appropriate controller for me and add the reference for that to my assets controller variable. Now that this is done, the next thing that I'm going to be doing is coming to the point where I basically define my scaffold. And underneath of the scaffold, we haven't added a body attribute yet. So let's add a body attribute and set that to a function called build UI, and then the build UI function will get the context passed to it. Once this is done, I'm basically going to come to the bottom, and after the app bar, I am going to define the function. It's going to return a widget. It's going to be called _build UI, takes in a build context. And here we're going to be doing the following. Firstly, I'll make sure that I return a safe area widget, and the child for that is going to be a column, like so, and then the column is going to contain some children, which for now is going to be an empty list. Once this is done, since I want to react to the actual changes that happen within the assets controller, I need to wrap the actual widget tree with an observable widget. So for that, I will basically wrap the column with a widget, and this widget is going to be the OBX widget that we actually get from the GetX package. And now we should be able to react to the changes. This widget is going to require us to define a function that actually details how the actual widgets underneath of this are built. So I'll fix it up like so, and that's pretty much all we had to do. So as you can see that the get package actually gives us an error saying that the improper use of GetX has been detected. You should only use GetX or OBX for the specific widget that will be updated. And the reason we're getting this error, and I wanted to specifically show you this, is that currently, since we're using the OBX widget, and within this or underneath of its widget tree, we are not actually accessing any type of controller or any type of state that's changing, that's using get. It's giving us an error that, hey, you do not need to use it then if you're not going to be actually reacting to the changes. So as soon as I implement some functionality within the UI that starts to read information from the assets controller, the dish error should be fixed. So let's do that. So to do that, what I'll do firstly is try to create a function which is going to be responsible for showing the text for the actual total amount of our portfolio. So for that, I will firstly come to the bottom, and here I'm going to do the following. I'll say I have a function that returns a widget. It's going to be called portfolio value, and it's going to take in the build context passed to it like so, and then I'll open up the function's body. Within this, I'm going to say that I am going to return a container, and then with this, I am going to define a specific height and width and margin for the container. So the width will be the width of our screen. Then I am going to say that the margin is going to be on the vertical axis symmetric, and it's going to be 3% the height of the screen from the top and bottom. And after this, I am going to define the actual child for this container. So the child is going to be a center widget. And with this, I'm going to say that the child for that is going to be a text widget, but we're going to use the which constructor for that. And then here I need to pass in a text span. So let's add a text span, which is going to have a children's list, which for now is going to be empty. And with this done, we can do command save. So still the error is not going to fix, so nothing to worry about. We just need to make sure that underneath of our OBX widget, we need to access the assets controller. So we'll just do that in a bit. So now what I need to do is basically take this function, come back to my build UI, and then to the column, I'm going to add our portfolio value, and I'm going to say that the context will be passed to it. And that's pretty much all we have to do. And we can continue with the actual development. So now what I'd like to do is display some text. So the first text is just going to be a text span with a $sign. So I'll quickly add that, and let's do save. And the last thing after this is going to be the actual text, which is going to detail information regarding the total value of our portfolio. So for that, I need to create a function which is going to take into account all of the different assets or coins that we've added, and then take into account the amount for each of them, add everything together, and then return to me an actual value for what the total portfolio value is. So to do that, what I will do is actually come back to my assets underscore controller and actually create a function here, which is going to be responsible for calculating the value of the actual assets, which are under the tracked assets list. So to do this, let's do that. Let's firstly create a function, and let's say that this function is going to be double as the return value, and it's going to be called get portfolio value, like so. And it's going to take no parameters. Then within this function, I'm going to do the following, which is if the tracked assets are empty, so is empty, then our portfolio value is 0. We don't have to calculate anything. If that is not the case, then we can proceed forwards. I'm going to say that I'm going to create a variable called value, set that to 0, and then I'm going to create a for loop, and I'm going to say that we are going to go over every asset. So I'm going to say for tracked asset in, and then I'm going to say tracked assets, there we go, and this needs to be tracked asset, there we go. For every asset that's in tracked assets, I'm going to do the following. I'll add to the value the actual assets amount. So we need to now get the assets price. So where do we get the assets price for? Well, currently our assets controller doesn't have any idea for what the actual price of a coin is. Sure, we are keeping track of within our tracked assets list the amount of a coin that we have and what the actual name of that coin is, but we do not know at this point of time what the actual value of that coin is. So for that, what we need to do is actually access the API once again and hit the same endpoint, which is /v1/currencies, and then here we are going to once again get a list of data returned to us, which is going to contain these different objects, each corresponding to a specific coin, and there we're going to have the ability to access this values key, which is going to contain the USD value for each of these different coins. So this is practically what we have to do. So we need to now access the API once again, get the actual information returned to us from the currencies endpoint, and then use that information to actually get the price for the actual coin that we're concerned with. So to do that, now I need to create a function that is going to do that for us. So how are we going to be doing that? Well, firstly, what I am going to do is make sure that I create a function that when the asset controller gets created, actually pulls the information from the API. So let's do that. I'm going to say that I'm going to have a function. It's going to be future void, and I'm going to say it's going to be called getAssets, like so. Then I'll say that this function is going to be async and open up its body. The first thing that I am going to be doing is creating a variable on the assets controller, and it's going to be of type rxbool called loading, and by default I'm going to set this to a false observable. And then once we actually start the operation of getting the assets information, I'm going to say that the loading value is going to be true. There we go. Then the next thing after this is to actually access our HTTP service, since we need to actually send an HTTP request. So there we go. And then to find it, I will do get.find. Now that we have access to our HTTP service, what I'm going to be doing then creating a variable which will be called response data and setting that equal to await HTTP service.get. And then I am basically going to pass here the endpoint from where I want to get the information. So it's going to be the currencies endpoint. So I'll add that here like so. Then I am going to say that I'm going to get a response returned to me, which will be of type currencies list API response. So again, this class comes from the API underscore response.dart, and this basically models how the response is going to look from our API. So this is going to contain a list of coin data, and the coin data object is going to contain information regarding the actual value for each of the coins that we're concerned with. So now what I need to do is basically take the response that I get and then from that instantiate an instance of currencies list API response object. So I'm going to do currencies list API response is equals to, and then I'm going to do currencies list API response dot from JSON and pass it the actual response data. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now with this done, we can do save and we can move to the next step. So the next step in the process, now that we have this, is to actually save this information within a variable so that we can access it within other functions and throughout this actual class. So to do that, at the very top of my class, I'm going to create another variable. It's going to be of type rxList, and it's going to contain coin data information within it. So this is going to be a list of coin data objects. I'm going to call this coin data and set that equal to an empty list, which is observable. And then here I'm going to define the type of item that we're going to be adding to this list. So now that this is done, we can actually go ahead, and after we've transformed our response and created that into a currencies list API response object, I am going to do the following, which is coin data dot value. The list is going to be equal to the currencies list API response that we get dot, and then the actual data that we have on it. And that's pretty much all we had to do. And since this is going to be a null value, or can possibly be a null value, I'm going to use a nullivar operator and say that if this is null, then we'll just set the list to be an empty list. Then once this is done, finally we can do loading dot value is false since we've completed the operation. And once this is done, I can come to the onInit function, and after the superclasses onInit has been called, basically called getAssets, and do command save, and that's pretty much all we had to do. So now I can come back to my actual getPortfolioValue function, and here I can do the following. I'm going to say that if our coin data list is empty, then we're also going to return 0. Why? Because we don't have the information for the prices of these coins to actually generate the portfolio value from. But if the coin data is not empty, and if the tracked assets list isn't empty, then we can actually calculate the value. So to calculate the value, what I need to do is basically go over each of the assets within my tracked assets list and then add its value times the amount of it to the actual value. But how do we get the actual assets price or the actual coins price from this actual list of coin data? Well, for that, I can create another function that's responsible for that. So I'll say that I'll create another function, and this is going to be double, but it's going to be an optional return. So it might return something, it might return null. And then I'm going to say that it's going to be called get asset price, like so. Then this is going to actually take in a name of the asset, so the name of the coin. And then I'm going to do the following. I'll say that I'll have coin data variable, data, and this is going to be equal to, and now what I need to do is basically from the coin data list, get the appropriate object which corresponds to the actual coin for which we've passed the name for. So for that, again, I'm going to create another function, and I'm going to say this is going to return an optional coin data object. I'm going to say it's going to be called get coin data, and this is going to take in the name of the coin. Then we'll do the following. I'm going to say that I'm going to return the coin data dot, and then from there I need to find first value, and I'm going to do first where or null. So basically means if we find an element which corresponds to the condition that we set here, then we return that, otherwise we return null. So here what we're going to do is basically get an element passed to us. So we're going to check to see if the element's name, so if the coin data object that we guess, its name is equal to the name that the actual function gets passed, then if that's the case, that's the actual coin data object that we need to return. We're going to return that, and that's pretty much all we had to do. Then I can come back to the get asset price function. Here I can call the get coin data function, pass in the name, and that's pretty much all I had to do. And once this is done, the next thing I'm going to do is return data, and on the data I am going to have the values property, so I'll access that. On values, I'm going to have the value in terms of BTC, ETH, and USD. I need the USD value, so USD. And then on that, I'm going to have the price, and then the price is going to be num. If you see, it's going to be a number, so I need to convert that to double. There we go. And then that's pretty much all I had to do. So now with this done, we can come back to the actual asset here, and I'm going to do the following, which is in the case that this value is null, then what I'm going to do is basically return 0, and I can change the return type here to be double, not a double optional. Then I'm going to come back here and say value plus equals the function get asset price, and then we pass the actual name of the asset here. We can access that by doing asset.name times the amount of the actual asset that we own or the coin that we own. So that's going to be an asset dot and then amount. There we go, and that's pretty much all we had to do at command C. So now with this done, the last thing we have to do once we've looped over all of the assets and calculated the value for them and added that to our value variable, return the value back to us. And that's all we had to do. So now that this function's ready, let's do this. Let's stop running our application, or let's actually restart our application. We're still going to get the error, but this is going to give us a clean working slate. Let's come back to our home page. Let's come to the point where we're showing our actual text.rich widget, where we currently now only have a text span that actually shows us a $sign. And after that, let's add another text span. And this text span is going to have text, but this text is going to be the actual value of our portfolio. So to do that, I will do the following. I will basically say that we're going to have a string, and the string is going to have the assets controller dot and then get portfolio value. There we go. Let's do save, and let's add the remaining commas. Let's restart our application. At this time, hopefully the error should be fixed, and there you go. You can see that now it's showing us 0.0 for the portfolio value, and the reason for that is since we restarted our application, currently we have nothing within our track assets list. But as soon as I add something, so let me click on the plus button here, Bitcoin, let's say I do 1.34 Bitcoins, add that, it's going to update the value, and you can see that now it's showing me that I have $94,716 worth of Bitcoins in my portfolio. So now it's working as intended. But what I like to do is fix the styling for this. So let me quickly do that by adding a style property to the text span. There we go. And then after this, I'd like to also truncate the decimal to only 2 decimal values. So for that, I will do, after I get the portfolio value to string as fixed, and here I'm going to say 2 fraction digits. And that's pretty much all we had to do. Let's do save and let's see how it looks. So now it looks great. And after this is done, the next thing that I am going to be doing is basically, after I've defined this text span, is actually add another text span, which is going to say portfolio value like so. And now it says portfolio value, and I want to move this to the next line. So for that, after I have added the portfolio value within the string, I'm going to add a new line character. And there we go. Now it looks great. I want to center all of the text. So for that, what I'll do is come to my text span, and on the text.rich widget that I have, I'm going to say that the text align property is going to be text align.center, save, and there we go. Now it looks great. So with this done, now we're showing the appropriate value, and because of us using the observable widget in the widget tree, and then also using observable variables within our assets controller, as you can see, every time something happens to these actual variables and the value for them changes, our UI is going to react and update itself. So now let's just say that I go ahead and I add some Ethereum. So let's say that I actually add some Ethereum, and I say I have 45 Ethereum. I wish, but there we go. As you can see that the portfolio value updates, and now it's showing us that the total value of my portfolio is $252,907. So everything looks great. So I can move to the next step now, which is to actually show the list of our actual coins and the coins that we own. So let's do that. So to do that, I will come to the bottom of my home page. Here I'm going to say that I'm going to define a function, return the widget, is called underscore tracked assets list, gets a build context passed to it, and then within this I'm going to say that I will return a padding widget like so. And then here I'm going to say that the padding is going to be the following, which is edge insets.symmetric on the horizontal axis like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do. Once this is done, I will add a child to the actual padding widget, and this is going to be a actual column. The column is going to have a children's list, and let's do command save. The first child within this column is actually going to be the text which shows portfolio value. So let's do that. So for that, I'll firstly add a sized box. The sized box is going to have a height. The height will be 5% the height of the screen. So let me just copy and paste that in. There we go. And then I'll do command save. And then after this, we are going to, for the sized box, actually add a child. And the child is going to be a text widget with some styling applied to it, which says portfolio like so. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So now I'll take this tracked assets list function, go to the top to my build UI function after the portfolio value function called add the tracked assets list. And that's pretty much all we had to do, and also pass this the context. Save. And now we're seeing portfolio being shown here. I want to make sure that within my column, everything's aligned to the left on the horizontal axis. So for that, on my column, I'm going to say that the cross-axis alignment is going to be cross-axis alignment.start. So moves everything to the left. And then the main axis alignment is going to be main axis alignment.start. And once we add the list to this, it's going to move everything. But for now, let's just keep moving on. So now that this is done, after I've defined my portfolio, I'm going to add another sized box. And this size box is going to have a height and a width. So let's copy and paste those in. So the height is 65% the height of the screen, width is the complete width. So now our portfolio, as you can see, is at the left side, the text has moved. And then what I'm going to do is for this size box, I'm going to have a child, which is going to be a list view, which we are going to be building programmatically. So I'm going to do list view.builder. The item builder function will take in the context and the index for the item that's being built. And that's all we had to do. And once this is done, I'll define the item count on this. So the item count is going to be on our assets controller, the tracked assets list, and then the length of that. And that's pretty much all we had to do. Then within the item builder, I am going to do the following. I'll say that I'm going to have tracked asset, and then it's going to be tracked asset, and it's going to be equal to our assets controller dot tracked assets, and then whatever the asset at the specific index is. Then I'm going to say that now I will return a list tile widget. And let's do this first. Let's actually add a text to it, which actually shows the asset's name. So for that, I'll say that the title for this is going to be a text widget, and it's going to have tracked asset dot name as its text. There we go. I'm seeing Bitcoin and I'm seeing Ethereum. So now that this is done, let's add a subtitle which actually shows me the actual value, the USD value for each of these coins. So for that, let's do subtitle text. There we go. And then within this, I'm going to have a string. The string is going to say USD, colon, space, and then the actual value of the coin. So how do I get the value? What I can do is actually access the assets controller. And then on that, I can do get asset price. And then here, what I can do is basically say that I'm going to pass the tracked asset dot and then the name. And that's pretty much all we had to do. Save. Let's see if we see the value. There we go. So it's telling me that the price of Bitcoin currently is $70,000. Ethereum is $30,513. So what I can do now is basically set the fraction digits on this. So to do that, I'll do toString as fixed 2, and let's do save. Let's see how it looks. Looks great. So now with this done, the next thing that I am going to be doing after this is setting the actual image here. So to add the image, I need to firstly define a function that returns the URL for each of these different coins. So for that, what I'll do is come to my utils.dart, and here I'm going to create a function which returns a string, and it's called get crypto image URL. It's going to basically get to it past the name of the actual crypto, and then this function is going to return a URL, and the URL that we're going to return is going to be the following. Somebody very kindly by the name of Eric Thiart, as you can see, has gone ahead and created a GitHub repo in which they've added all of the different icons for all of these cryptocurrencies. And we can basically now go ahead and actually access these URLs, which actually are going to return to us these images for each of these cryptocurrency icons. So as you can see, we have folders, each corresponding to the resolution of these images. And if I go under 128, you can see that for all of these different crypto coins, we have the name of them and then .png. So what I can do now is basically go ahead and access these different images by using the following URL. So what I'm going to do is access the following URL, which is going to be this, and I'm going to leave a link down in the description below to the actual source code for this project, so you can actually download the source code, and you're going to see that the function is going to have this URL within it. And then after the final / we basically add the name of the cryptocurrency. So if I do, for example, bitcoin.png, it's going to return to me Bitcoin image. If I do Ethereum, it's going to return Ethereum to me. So let's copy this URL. Let's come back and let's paste this here. And what I basically need to do is make sure that when we return the actual string, we actually at the very end not use Ethereum, but the actual name of the coin that gets passed to us. So basically add that within the string. So I'm going to do $, curly brackets, or $, name should be fine. And there we go. Now it's going to work as we want it to. So now when this is done, I can use this function. So let's close down utils.dart, come back to home page. And then on home page, I'm going to do the following. I'll set the actual leading property on the list tile to be a image.network. And then the source here is going to be get crypto image URL. And then the name here is going to be tracked asset.name. There we go. And save, and now we should be able to see the actual images. But before I can see that, I need to do one last thing, and that is to make sure that within this function, when we actually add the name, we actually make sure that the name is converted to all lowercase. So I'm going to do name.toLowercase, then save, then run application once again. And let's restart our application because the error isn't going to go away by itself. So let's try it again. Let's click plus. Bitcoin 1.4. Let's do 1.3. To fix this actual overflow error that you're seeing, what you can do is come to the actual top of your build function, and then on the scaffold you can do resize to avoid bottom inset to be false. Save, and there we go. Now it should be fixed. So now let's add the asset. There we go. Now it's showing me the correct image. I can do Ethereum as well. So let's do Ethereum, or let's do Tether. And let's do 12.5 Tether, add. And there we go. Everything looks great. The portfolio value is being updated. The list is being updated and everything looks stunning. So the last thing I have to do is basically to the very trailing end of this, actually add some text, which basically shows the amount that we own of this particular asset. So to do that, let's come to the very bottom to our tracked assets list, to our actual list tile. And then after the subtitle, I'm going to say that I am going to have a trailing widget. It's going to be a text widget, and it's going to be the tracked asset dot amount dot toString. There we go, save. Now we can see it. I want to update the styling for this, so I'll update the styling like so. And now we can see that we own 1.3 Bitcoin, we own 12.5 Tether. The value of Tether is $1 US, value of Bitcoin is 70672 US dollars. So each Bitcoin is this much. Total value of our portfolio is $91,886.58. So everything looks great. So the last thing I'd like to do is basically implement functionality on my actual homepage so that when I click on each of these list tiles, it actually takes me to the details page for these individual coins so that I can see more information regarding them. So to do that, let's do this. Let's actually come to our pages. Let's create a new file and let's call this our details_page.dart. Then once this is done, let's create a stateless widget, call it our details page. And then for the build function, let's return a scaffold. After this, for the details page, what I'm going to do is make sure that when the details page is actually created, we need to pass it the actual information for the actual coin that we want to show information for. So in this case, I'll say that it's going to be a coin data variable that needs to be passed to the details page when it gets constructed, and it's going to be called coin. Then on the details page, I'm going to say that it's going to require a named argument passed to its constructor, which will be this .coin, save, and that's pretty much all we had to do. Let's come back to our home page, and then on the actual list tile, after the trailing widget has been defined, I can say that when it's tapped, we can call the following function, within which we can navigate to the actual detail page. So to navigate to the detail page, it's going to be very simple. All we have to do is the following, get.to, and then we need to pass here a function, and the function basically defines how the route is going to be built. So here I will say that I'm going to return details page. There we go. And then the coin here is going to be our actual coin. So to get the coin data, what I can do is actually say assets controller dot get coin data for the tracked asset, which currently has this name. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So with this done, let's actually add the trailing commas, and that's all we had to do. So it's giving me an error saying that the argument type coin data optional can't be assigned to parameter coin data. So let's add a exclamation mark here, save, and that's pretty much all we had to do. Let's try this out. So if I click on each of these, it takes me to the detail page. There we go. So on my details page, I'm going to quickly go ahead and add some information so that we can actually see an app bar. So let's do that. So to do that, let's come to our details page scaffold. Let's actually add a app bar, set that to a call to a function called app bar, like so. Then what I'm going to do is define this actual function, returns a preferred size widget, app bar. Within this, I'm going to say return app bar. Then I'm going to say that we're going to have center title true, save, and then we can say that the title is going to be a text widget, which is going to be the coin's name. Save. There we go. Now we can see Bitcoin, and then we can go back, Tether, and we can go back. Everything's looking great. So now what I'd like to do is basically implement the other parts of the UI on our actual details page so that we can see information regarding this individual coin. So firstly, what I'd like to do is show the price for this specific coin, and then also its image, and then some other value regarding what the value of the coin is, and then underneath of that also how the actual price has changed within the last 24 hours. So to do this, what I'm going to be doing is firstly on the scaffold defining the body and saying that it's going to be a call to a function build UI. And then what I'm going to say is that build UI is going to get the context passed to it. Then I'm going to quickly create this function like so, turn the widget, build UI. Within this, we are going to do the following. Firstly, we'll return a safe area widget, and the child for that is going to be a padding widget. And the padding here is going to be on the horizontal axis only, and it's going to be symmetric. It's going to be 2% of the width from each side, like so. Once this is done on the actual padding widget, I am going to say that we're going to have a child, and that will be a column. The column is going to have a list of children, and the children are going to be the following. So I'm going to have a call to a function, which will be asset price, and it's going to get the context passed to it. And that's pretty much all we had to do. So let's quickly create this actual function. Again, returns a widget called asset price, gets the build context passed to it. Within this, I'm going to say that I will return a sized box. And then the sized box is going to have a height, and the height is going to be 10% the height of our screen. So let me just copy and paste that in like so. Save, and then we can move on to the next step. So within this, I'm going to have a text which actually shows the price of the actual currency, or the coin I should say, image, and then I'm also going to have the actual amount of percentage change that happened within the price. So to do that, let's actually add the child to our size box. It's going to be a row widget. It's going to have some children, and the first child is going to be image.network, and here we're going to do get crypto image URL for the coin.name. There we go. Let's save this and let's see if we can see. There we go, we can see it. Next thing I'd like to do is basically add some padding to this. So I'm going to take this actual widget, I'm going to wrap this with a padding widget, and I'm going to say that the padding is going to be 20 from all sides. And there we go, now it looks good. Then after this, I'm going to add a text widget. It's going to be rich once again. It's going to have a text span, which is going to have a children's list, which is going to be empty to begin with. Then within this, I'm going to firstly add another text span, and this is going to have text, and that the text is going to be the actual value of the coin. So to do that, let's create a string. Firstly, it's going to have a $sign, so let's add that, backslash to escape, then $, and then after that space, and then I'm going to interpolate the value of the coin. To do that, we can do coin.values.usd.price, and then I can do .toString as fixed 2. And then since these can be null, I can add the null over access operator. Save, and there we go, we can see the actual value. Let's fix the styling for this to increase the font size, and now it looks good. And then after this, I'm going to have another text span. So let me do this. Let me just add the trailing commas, then copy this text span, paste it again. But this time I'm going to do coin.values.usd.price, but instead of price, it's going to be percentage change in the past 24 hours, and save. And then I'm going to do the following, which is to actually move this to the next line. So for that, I'm going to come to the first text span, and after I've actually added the value of the actual coin, I'm going to add a new line character. So now it's moved to the next. Then I'm going to update the font size to 15. And let's see how it looks. Looks great. And then what I'm going to do is basically say that the color is going to depend upon a factor. And that is if the coin value.usd and then I'm going to do a percentage change in the past 24 hours is greater than 0. So if the change is greater than 0, if it's a positive change, the price has increased, then the color is going to be colors.green. Otherwise, it's going to be colors.red. And that's all we had to do. And remove the const here, save. And there we go. So it's showing us that the value is actually decreased by $0.09, or its percentage, so by 9%, in the actual past 24 hours. And this needs to be actually a percentage sign. So let me remove this from here, and then actually add a % sign here by doing like so. Save, and there we go. So now it looks good, and then add a space. So 0.09% is the actual change in the actual price that has happened in the past 24 hours. So now that we're seeing this, the last thing I have to do is basically build these different cards that are going to show some information regarding this cryptocurrency, which is the circulating price and things like that. So let's do that. So for that, I'm going to do the following. I will come to the safe area widget, then come to its column. And here I'm going to say that it's going to be a call to a function after the asset's price called asset info. It's going to get the context passed to it as well. Then what I'm going to do is basically come to the very bottom and create a function, returns a widget called asset info, gets the build context passed to it. Within this, I'm going to say that we're going to return an expanded widget. the child of which is going to be a grid view. And then it's going to have a grid delegate, which we'll define in just a bit. But for those of you that haven't worked with grid views yet, a grid delegate basically defines some properties on the grid view so that it can understand how to render the children within it. So we need to define how many children are going to be on the cross axis. So since our grid is vertically scrollable, the cross axis is going to be the horizontal axis. So we're going to have a const sliver grid delegate with fixed cross axis count, and it's going to be 2. There we go. That's all we had to do. And we're not getting any errors, so that's a good sign. Then after this, I'm also going to define the child aspect ratio on this to be 0.9. And then after this, I can define the children's list on this, which for now is empty. So what I'm going to do is now create a function, which is going to basically return to me a card, and then we can pass some parameters to this actual function so that the information that's displayed within these cards is different. So to do that, let's create another function, which is going to return a widget. It's going to be called underscore info card. It's going to get passed a title and a subtitle to it, and then it's going to do the following. It's going to return to us a container, like so. Then the container is going to have some margin. Then the container is going to have some decoration. So let me just copy and paste those in. It's just the color of black 12 and border radius 15. And then it's going to have a child. The child is going to be a column, which is going to have a children's list. Let's do save. Let's take this info card function. Let's go to our assets info children's list, add info card. And then let's do this. For the first info card, the actual title is going to be circulating supply. And then the actual subtitle is going to be the actual value of the circulating supply, which I can do by coin.circulatingsupply.toString. There we go. Save. There we go. Now we're seeing the card and we're seeing the appropriate styling applied to it. So now all I got to do is go to my column, specify the actual main and cross-axis alignment on it, then comes to the children's list, say that the text is going to be title, like so. Let's save and let's see how it looks. Looks great. And then after this, have another text, which is our subtitle. And let's do save. There we go. It's saying circulating supply is this much. Then what I can do is basically take this info card once again, paste it again within the grids view children list, and once more. But now the next info card is going to show us the maximum supply. And then the info card after that is going to be the total supply. Save. There we go. We can see all of them. Then it's going to be for the second info card coin.max supply. And for the third one, coin.total supply, I believe, yes. Save. And there we go. Now it looks great. So now with this done, what I can do is actually add some spacing within these cards. So for that, I'll come to the container and I'm going to add some margin to that. And it's going to be on both horizontal and vertical axis, symmetric 10 and 10 pixels. There we go. Now it looks great. Since we're using the grid view, we have this scrolling animation happening as well with some elasticity on it. So everything looks great. So the last thing I'd like to do is basically fix the styling for each of these texts. So for the main title, I'd like to increase the size of it and also increase its font weight. So I've done that. And then for the subtitle, I'd like to also change its font size and then the font weight. And now everything looks great. And with that, we've completed the UI for our details page. So now if I go back, click on Tether, it looks good. If I go on Bitcoin, it looks good. So now the final thing that we have to do is implement functionality within our application so that when the application is restarted or relaunched by the user, that all of the information within it is persisted. Because for now, as soon as we close our application or restart our application or shut down our application, the information that's within the tracked assets list within our assets controller is lost. As you can see, I restarted the application and now the information from my portfolio is gone and I don't know anything about what was previously added. So to fix that, what we are going to be doing is actually adding all of the functionality within our assets controller. So let's just close all of the files and open that up. And what I'd basically like to do is the following. Every time we update our tracked assets list, I'd like to take that tracked assets list and save that as a string representation within my actual device's storage. And then every time we open up our application or every time our assets controller is created, then we read that information from that actual string and then regenerate our tracked assets list. And this way we'll be able to persist information for the actual assets that we currently own, and it's going to make sure that when we restart our application or come back to application that no data is lost. So how are we going to be doing that? Well, let's do this. Let's firstly take a look at what we have to do to make sure that we can save the information within our device's shared preferences for when the actual tracked asset list gets updated, and then we'll take a look at how to read information from there afterwards. So our function that's responsible for add tracked asset is a great place to add this logic to, because when we add a new tracked asset, then I'd like to update the actual information that's being stored within shared preferences to now be up to date with what's currently within our tracked assets list. So to do that, firstly, you need to make sure that within your pubspec.yaml file, you've added the shared preference dependency, because that's the package we're going to be using to save the information. And then after that, we are going to be doing the following. Firstly, what I'll do is that I will take each of these tracked assets and convert them into strings, because strings are the things that we're going to be saving. We can't save an instance of a tracked asset within shared preferences. It doesn't support that. So I'm going to say that I'm going to have a list of string. Each string is going to correspond within this list to an individual tracked asset. Then I'm going to say it's going to be called data, and it's going to be equal to tracked assets dot map. Then we're going to go over each asset, and over each asset I'm going to do the following thing, which is JSON encode and basically pass it the asset. And that's pretty much all we have to do. And as you can see, the JSON encode function returns to us a string. And finally, I'm going to cast this actual iterable that the map function returns to us to a list. And that's all we had to do. So now this list is going to contain a string representation for all of the tracked asset objects that are within the tracked assets list. Then I can access my shared preferences instance by doing shared preferences prefs is equals to, and then await. And then I can also make sure that now I mark this function as async. Await shared preferences dot, and then get instance. There we go. Once this is done, I can do await. And then after this, I can do await prefs dot set. And we are going to use the functional set string list since we have a list of strings. The key here is the actual identifier that we're going to be using then to update this actual string, but also retrieve information from our shared preferences. So the key is important. And I'm going to say that the key is going to be a string. It's going to be underscore tracked assets. And the value here is going to be the data. That's pretty much all we had to do. Let's do save. Let's restart our application and let's show this to you in action. So if I come here, I click plus Bitcoin, let's say 1 Bitcoin, add. There we go, everything looks great. Now the information has been added to our shared preferences, but still if I restart my application, since the app isn't reloading the information or rereading the information when the asset controller is created, our portfolio is still being shown as 0. Even though in the previous step, we've already added something to our tracked assets and we've also updated the actual shared preferences to save this new tracked assets list within itself. So now what I'm going to be doing is basically creating a function which is not going to return anything, and I'm going to say it's going to be called load tracked assets from storage. And then I'm going to say it's going to be an async function. Within this, I need to get access to my shared preferences. So for that, I'll just copy this line, paste it in once again. And then I'm going to do the following. I'm going to say that I'm going to have a list of string, and this might be optional. And then I'm going to say that it's going to be data and it's going to be equal to prefs.get string list. And here the key is going to be the same. So if this key doesn't exist within our shared preferences, then we're going to get null returned to us. So this is why it's an optional list string. And then after this, I'm going to do the following. I'm going to say if the data is not equals to null, then I'm going to set the tracked assets list dot value to be equal to the following. And all we have to do is go over our data list. And now we need to do the opposite. So before we converted the tracked asset objects to string representations, now we need to take these strings and convert them back into tracked assets objects. So to do that, I'll do data.map. We're going to get each element and we're going to do the following. I'm going to do tracked asset dot from JSON, and then we're going to do within this JSON decode and pass it the element that gets passed to us. And then after this, I just got to mark this as toList, and that's pretty much all we had to do. So let's do save, and let's take this load tracked assets function and make sure that when the assets controller on init function is called, after we've called get assets, we do underscore load tracked assets as well from storage, save, and that's pretty much all we had to do. So now if I restart my application, the information is read and all of the values are updated and everything looks great. And now the information is being persisted as well. So if I add something new now, let's just say, for example, Ethereum, and let's just do 12, add, everything's being updated nicely. If I restart the application, then the information is being persisted, and as soon as we get new information, then the UI is reacting and the value of the portfolio is being updated as well. So with that, that's pretty much it for today's video. Now you should have a good understanding of how GetX work and what are the fundamental pillars of this framework. As always, if you enjoyed this video, then please don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to my channel so that you get notified every time I release a new video. And if you like videos like this and want more Flutter videos in the future, then leave a comment down below letting me know what type of videos you'd be interested in. And as always, stay happy, stay healthy, keep learning, keep growing, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.